Hi folks, a couple of weeks ago, before we went into all this lockdown business, I went out for a little walk I went out for a wheel in my little scooter up and down my local village high street, and in the village there is a hardware shop. It's one of these funny old-fashioned places. You half expect to be served by Arkwright, but I mean, nothing to Americans, I suppose, but open all hours. It's a program with Ronnie Barker, and it used to be very funny. But anyway, it's one of these shops, but it's one of these shops where you go in and it's sort of, you've got the old shop front, but then you go down a wee corridor at the back and you go down some stairs and there's a corridor full of mostly hardware and tools. And then you get to the end of that and there's a stairway down that takes you down into a basement, and there they've got paint and stuff, and then there's a stairway down from that to another basement. Or you can go the other way and you go out the back and there's a huge big sort of shed thing out the back. But it's one of these shops that you go into and you think they're not going to stock anything because it's just a little high street shop in a little old village, but it actually has just about everything. If you ask for something obscure, they'll have 3 or 4 different varieties of it. Now, I'm in Scotland. In Scotland, selling knives now requires a license, so very few places do. So if you go into a hardware shop these days, you can buy a hatchet or a chainsaw or a machete or whatever, but you can't buy a pocket knife because that would be dangerous and you might cut somebody. So it's unusual. But I just happened to see when I was scooting by in their window, they had a couple of Swiss Army knives. So I just thought I'd go in on the off chance, see what they had. And they did have, I think, 4 different models of Swiss Army knife, and I did pick up a couple just to, because of just ones that I kind of thought I should have, the Explorer and the Tinker. I have about 10 or a dozen Swiss Army knives, but I didn't have a Tinker or an Explorer, and they're just 2 patterns that, you just kind of think you ought to have. But anyway, I asked him, do you have any other pocket knives? He said, oh yes, they're over here. So I went over and I had a look. And I came away with 6 knives altogether. But I'm not really going to talk about all of those here. I want to just talk about one, although you'll see a couple of the others on the table here. The point of this video, if there is a point to anything in any of this business, is well, it's this really. Now this is a knife I got from Paddy, but you'll see on there, if it wants to focus, which it hopefully will, it says Tomahawk Lamb Foot. Now, Tomahawk is, I suppose, the brand name for this particular budget knife, and it features a couple of what look more like fire axes than tomahawks, but nonetheless, somebody probably thought, it's an axe. What's the difference? It's an axe. But anyway, it's a lamb foot. Now, you can argue all day about whether it's a lamb's foot or a sheep's foot. I would probably have called this a sheep's foot, but maybe me just being pedantic. But the difference I always think is that if you have a blade that has parallel sides, it's going to be a sheep's foot. If they get narrower towards the point, then I would call that lamb's foot, and if they get wider, I'd call it a ram's foot. And that's just me. I don't know if there's any truth in that, or if I'm just making that up as I go along. But this one, you could argue it does get slightly narrower towards the tip, so I'll give it to them. I'll call it a lamb's foot. If this is a lamb's foot, it's a lamb's foot. Now, it's quite a traditional pattern. This is what I would really call a lamb's foot, and this is quite a posh upmarket version. This is one of my Lee White Taylor's Eyewitness knives. Now that's a lamb's foot because it definitely gets thinner towards the end. There's no doubt about that. And if we wanted an example of a ram's foot, this Ottomesser is probably a pretty good example. It just gets that little bit wider towards the end when you move away from the Ricasso towards the tip. But anyway, it's quite a common pattern for a working man's knife. There's another Sheffield one. I would have called that probably a sheep's foot. It's fairly parallel as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, if there's some doubt about what's a lamb's foot and what's not a lamb's foot and whatever, let me just take some of these out of the way. make a bit of room, I have for you the unequivocal answer. Because here we have the real lamb foot. No doubt, it's because it says it on the side, it's a real lamb foot. And before I get into this knife, I just want to look at see one thing here. Now, most of these knives that I picked up, this is one of the others, cost around £5 to £6. This one was super expensive. This was about £13.50 or £13.95 or something. Surprisingly expensive, considering you know, other knives that are pretty close cost half the price. I don't know, but anyway, that's what it cost. I thought, well, I'd pick it up. But this is the bit that was interesting. CK, quite a common brand on lower end tools as a rule. But here's a funny place to see it. CK, again, now it's the same company. I think they're German, but they're one of these conglomerates. They've taken over lots of brands. So this particular knife here is a Mazarin. I think it's called something like 619. It's kind of, it's like a single blade Stockman. So if you imagine a Stockman with just the clip point blade and nothing else on it, that's probably what you'd have there. Anyway, there's a whole video on that knife, and it's a really nice knife. I like it a lot. And this one is also wickedly sharp because I sharpened it with my Lansky. Anyway, so this is a real lamb's foot. So we know I've just talked about lamb's foot is a blade that gets narrower towards the tip. Sheep's foot, one that's relatively parallel, and a ram's foot, one that gets broader towards the tip. So here we have the definitive answer. What is the real lamb's foot? So apparently, the real lamb's foot is this. Now, okay, it does get narrower towards the tip, but is there any man alive that would call that a lamb's foot? I would call it fairly unequivocally a Wharncliffe. But hey ho, it says it's a lamb's foot, so who am I to disagree? Now, there's no other markings on the blade as far as I'm aware. It's a bit of oil because these things all come soaked in oil. But basically, this is a little work knife. It's made of plastic. It's got nested steel liners. I assume that somewhere in the back of there, there's yeah, you can see it, and then there's a steel spring, but it's closed at the back completely. And it has this little Wharncliffe blade. Now, it's not a bad little knife. It does the job. You know, it can cut things and so on. Sort of. It's not a little pocket laser, there's no doubt about that. But, you know, I'm sure it would sharpen up in no time. I think it's some sort of stainless steel, but there's absolutely nothing on it. There was nothing on the packet to say what it's made of. But at least we know it's the real lamb's foot. So anyway, that's all I wanted to show you today. It's just a little thing. It's the opposite of my kind of high-end lamb's foot knife. Also an interesting shaped handle. But that's what's for sale in the UK today in my local hardware shop. So thank you very much for watching. If you like any of this stuff, and it's hard to imagine you liking this one, but hey, you never know. You might be a sucker for punishment. Hit the like button and feel free to subscribe. We'll have some nice knives coming up at some point. Bye.